Okay, hello Cloud Gurus and welcome to this lecture. So in this lecture we're going to create our own custom VPC. This is going to take slightly over 20 minutes, so we are going to break it into two parts. So this is a lab and you will need to log into the AWS console. Okay, so here I am in the AWS Management Console, and I'm going to do the rest of this section of the course out of the Ohio region. The reason for that is I'm currently in Austin, Texas. We have an office out here, and Ohio gives me the lowest latency. So we're going to find VPCs. If we go into Services, we're going to scroll down, we're going to find Networking and Content Delivery, and VPC is always going to be the top one under there. So go ahead and click in there. And this will load our VPC splash screen, and it looks a little bit like this. We can see all our resources by region, but we can also see all regions. So we can click on here and it'll load all our VPCs in all the regions around the world. Now you can go ahead and launch a VPC wizard, but the problem with doing that is you're not going to learn anything. And we want to be able to build a VPC all by ourselves. So if we click on our VPCs in here, we can see that we've got one VPC, and this is our default VPC. If we have a quick look at our subnets, we can see that it's got three subnets. They are all using this CIDR address range, so it's 172.31 and then .16.0, 172.31.0.0, and then 172.31.32.0. So these are /20. This gives us 4,091 available IP addresses. Now, you will note that each subnet is in a separate availability zone. And if we click on here, we can see our default route table. So this is also a route table that's created for us when we have our default VPCs. We can see our internet gateway. This allows our VPC to talk to the internet. And down here, we've got our network access control list. And then down here, we've got our security groups. And we can see a web DMZ security groups because I have used this VPC before. So let's go ahead and create a VPC. And what we want to see is what resources are created by default when we create our VPC. So what are we going to call this VPC? Well, I'm going to call it a Cloud Guru VPC. And in here, we've got our IPv4 CIDR address block. So what I'm going to do is I want the biggest address block possible. So I'm going to go 10.0.0.0 and then / and then 16. And in here, we can also do a IPv6 CIDR block. That's entirely up to you. I am going to use the Amazon provided IPv6 just so we can see some options later. And in here, we've got our tenancy. So if we want everything to be on dedicated hardware, we would click on dedicated. That is going to cost you a fortune though. I'm going to use the default, which is multi-tenant. So we are sharing our underlying hardware with other AWS customers. What I'm going to do is go ahead and hit create, and that has now created our VPC, and we've got a new VPC ID. So let's go back and see what has been created. Let's see if there's been a subnet created. And in here, you can see this VPC, all these three subnets are still our default VPC. We cannot see our new VPC in here. So when we create a VPC, it doesn't create any subnets. If we click on route table, however, we'll be able to see if we go over here and we just extend this across, you'll be able to see here. So here is our route table. This belongs to the A Cloud Guru VPC, and this one belongs to our default VPC. So it has created a route table. What about an internet gateway? Well, no, there's no A Cloud Guru VPC in there, so it hasn't created an internet gateway. If we go down and have a look at our network ACLs, we can now see that this does have a network ACL, a default network ACL that's been created. So it's the A Cloud Guru one. And likewise with a security group, we can see just by moving this across, it has created a security group. It's just showing us our VPC ID here. It's not giving us the name, but that's our A Cloud Guru VPC in there. So essentially, when we create our VPCs, we're creating by default a route table, a network ACL, and a security group. So this is what our VPC looks like now. Ignore the region, but everything else is identical. So we've got a router or a route table, we've got a network ACL, and we've got a security group. So that's what our VPC currently looks like. Now, in order to be able to use this VPC, we need to go in and create some subnets. So let's go ahead and do that now. So in order to be able to create our subnets, we go over here to subnets, and note these three subnets that already exist. They're using the 172.31. So these are the subnets that were created with our default VPC. They're not using the 10.0.0.0 range. So what we want to do is go ahead and hit create subnet. In here, we're going to give our subnet a name. Before we do that, let's click on VPC and click on A Cloud Guru VPC. And in here, you can go ahead and click on your preferred availability zone. Now, it is worth noting that let's say we've got two different AWS accounts. My US East 2A could be completely different to your US East 2A. And the reason Amazon do that is they randomize the availability zones, because everyone was always going to pick 2A and 2B as their sort of first and second preferences, and they want to make it completely random. So in one AWS account, a certain availability zone such as US East 2A could be a completely different availability zone, even though it's got the same name in another AWS account. So do just bear that in mind. So I'm going to use US East 2A, and I'm going to give it a subnet address range of 10.0.1.0, and then I'm going to give it a /24. And in here, I'm going to give it my name. So it's already giving me my name as Ryan Cronenberg. I want to make it very easy to read. So I'm going to do 10.0.1.0 and then hyphen, and then I'm going to also put in the name of the availability zone. So I'm going to call it US East 2A. And then that way I can, just by looking at the name, know both the CIDR address range as well as what availability zone that it's in. And so then I'm going to go ahead, and you can go in here and assign IPv6 if you want. I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to be using IPv4. So I'm going to go ahead and hit create. And that has now created my subnet. I can go ahead and hit close. And now we can see it in here. And if you do want to sort by VPC, just click in here, and then everything will be sorted by our VPCs. I'm going to go ahead and create one more subnet. And again, in here, I'm going to select my VPC. And I'm going to put this in US East 2B, and I'm going to give it a address range of 10.0.2.0/24, and the name I'm going to give it is going to be 10.0.2.0, then hyphen, and then it's going to be US East 2B, and I'm going to go ahead and hit create. So that has now gone ahead and created my two subnets, and you can see them in here. And just by looking at the name, I'm able to see what CIDR address ranges that it's using, as well as what availability zone that it is in. And note that we cannot have a subnet span availability zones. So it's always one subnet equals one availability zone. That comes up an awful lot in your exams. Now, if we scroll across here, there's a couple of things we need to look at. Auto assign public IP address by default has been turned off. So we are going to have to fix that, because we're going to have one of these as a public subnet and one of them as a private subnet. And the other thing we should also note is in here, we've only got 251 available addresses. Now, if you remember that website, CIDR.xyz, if we use a 10.0. Let's just change this to 0.0/24, we should be getting 256 addresses available to us, an actual usable amount of 254. We seem to be missing some. Why do we only have 251? And I'll put a link to this in the resources section of the course, but if you just go over to VPC subnet sizing, in here you can see that the allowed block size is between a /16, which is what we created, and the very top one is a /28, which we covered off in the last lecture. If we scroll down, we can actually go ahead and see some reserved IP addresses. And Amazon go ahead and reserve 5 IP addresses. They reserve the network address, they reserve the network broadcast address, and then they reserve 10.0.0.1 for the VPC router. So that's actually your VPC router's address. And 10.0.0.2 is reserved by AWS, and this is the IP address of the DNS server for your VPC. And then they actually just reserve one more, and they don't explain why, but they've reserved 10.0.0.3. So you're always going to have 5 addresses, and that's why it says 251 addresses instead of 256. So now that we have our subnets, we are going to want to have one that is publicly accessible. It's probably going to be this one. We'll just keep it simple. So 10.0.1.0. Now, in order for this to be publicly accessible, we're going to need EC2 instances to launch in it with public IP addresses. So we're going to need to auto assign our public IP addresses. So select the one that you want, the subnet that you want, go ahead to actions, and then just go over to modify auto assign IP IP and enable auto assign public IPv4. And there we go. That has now enabled it. And we are now able to launch EC2 instances into this subnet, and they'll automatically be able to get a public IP address. So this is what our VPC looks like right now. We've got our public subnet 10.0.1.0, and we've got our private subnet 10.0.2.0. We've got our network ACLs, our security groups, our root table. But what we're missing is a way to get into this VPC. So we're going to need to add an internet gateway, and then we're going to have to go in and start configuring our root tables. So let's go over to the AWS console. Okay, so to add our internet gateway, all we need to do is click on Internet Gateways in here. And you can see that there's no internet gateway for our VPC currently. So let's go ahead and create one. And I'm going to call this my IGW, so my internet gateway, and go ahead and hit create. That has now created an internet gateway. You can see my IGW is detached. That's the state that it's in now. So if I go to actions, I can go attach to a VPC, and I can go ahead and select a VPC. I'm going to select the A Cloud Guru VPC, and I'm going to go ahead and hit attach. And that has now attached an internet gateway. I could go ahead and do my IGW2 and create a second internet gateway and hit close. And let's see if I can attach a second internet gateway to my VPC. And if I click in here, you can see that there's no VPCs in this box. So you can only have one internet gateway per VPC. Don't worry about high availability. Amazon completely designed internet gateways to always be highly available. So just remember, you can only have one internet gateway attached to one VPC. I'm just going to go in and delete this internet gateway because we don't need it. So now that we have an internet gateway, we need to go into our root table and configure our main route so we have a route out to the internet. So I'm going to click on here. This is my default route table. And if we click on our routes, we can see two routes in here. And essentially what this is doing is it's allowing our subnets to be able to talk to each other. So any subnet that we have inside our VPC using these two routes, essentially it means that they can communicate to each other over IPv4 and then over IPv6. If we click on subnet associations and we maximize this just so you can see it a little bit better, it says down here, the following subnets have not been explicitly associated with any route tables and are therefore associated with the main route table. So if we were to put a route out to the internet in our main route table, that means that any subnets that we were creating would automatically be associated to our main route table. And what that would mean is that every subnet that we create by default would be public. Now that could be a security concern. So really what we want to do is always keep our main route table as private, and then we have a separate route table for our public subnets. So let's go ahead and do that. So let's go over and create a route table, and I'm going to call this my public route. So this essentially any route, any subnet that's associated with this route table will then be able to talk to the internet. Let's click in here on VPCs, and we're going to create it into our VPC and go ahead and hit create. And we now have two route tables. If we just minimize this a bit more, you can see we've got my public route, and then we've got my other route table. And you can see that this is the main route table and this is not the main one. So anytime we create a subnet, it's always going to be associated with the main. But with our public route, we have to go in and specifically associate our subnets with this public route. First thing we're going to do with our public route is create a route out to the internet. So we could go ahead and hit edit routes, and we can go in and add our routes. So to create a route out, all we do is type in o.o.o.o/ and then o. And then that will give us a destination. And then here we just type our target, and our target will pre-populate with all of these. What we want is our internet gateway, and then we select our internet gateway. And then we can also go in and add our route, and you can go, if you want to do IPv6, you just go : and then / and then O, and that will give us a route out. And again, we're going to do that using our internet gateway, and just click on your internet gateway in there. Go ahead and save your routes, and that has now given you a route out for IPv4 and IPv6 to our internet gateway. And now any subnet that's associated with this route table will automatically become public both for IPv4 as well as IPv6. So let's go ahead and click on our subnet associations. In here, go to Edit Subnet Association, and we're going to add this subnet to our public root table. And that has now associated that subnet with this root table. So if you go in and click on your main one, you'll be able to see that the only one that's associated with our root table is 2.0. We no longer have 1.0, and 1.0 is now associated with our public root table. And so you can see it in here, 10.0.1.0 is associated to this root table, and guess what? It has a route out to the internet. It's got our 0.0.0.0, which points to our internet gateway. So that's how it all works. So we now have a public subnet and we have a private subnet. The next thing to do is to go in and start provisioning EC2 instances, and we're going to create an EC2 instance in a public subnet as well as one in our private subnet. So then we're going to go in and test it. So we just go over to Compute, click on EC2. I'm going to launch two different EC2 instances. I'm going to go ahead and launch my instance, and I'm going to use the Amazon Linux 2 AMI. And I'm going to just use a T2 micro. So we're not going to leave everything as default. What we're going to do is we're going to go over to our network. We're going to change this to our VPC. And then we're going to select our public subnet, which is this one, US East 2A. So I'm going to click in there. And then you can see here it says auto-assign public IP address, use the subnet setting, which is enable. So it's automatically going to get a public IP address. Next, we're going to add our storage and add our tags. I'm going to add a tag. I'm just going to call this name, and then this will be web server 01. And then I'm going to go ahead and configure my security groups. Right now, I'm going to, if I click existing security groups, there's only my default security groups. Note that I do not have any WebDMZ security groups in here. That's because my WebDMZ security group was in my other VPC. So security groups do not span VPCs. I'm going to go ahead and create a new security group. I'm going to call it WebDMZ because we're going to need to be able to SSH into this, as well as give it internet access. As well as give it HTTP access. So I'm going to add in here HTTP, and then I'm going to go in and hit review and launch. So this has created a new security group that will allow, that has SSH and HTTP open to the world. And then I'm just going to go ahead and launch it. And I'm going to actually do a new key pair because I don't have this key pair on this computer. So I'm just going to call it my new key pair, and I'm going to download that. And then I'm going to go ahead and launch my instance, and that is now launching. And I'm going to go over to View Instances. We're going to launch our second instance. It's going to be an Amazon Linux AMI 2. Going to go ahead and hit Next. In here, make sure you change your network to your new VPC. And I'm going to launch this instance into US East 2B. Note, auto-assign public IP address. The last one said enable. This one says disable, and it's using the subnet settings. So we're not going to get a public IP address for this EC2 instance. Let's go ahead and add our storage. I'm just going to leave that as default. I'm going to add my tag, and the name, we might just call this my DB server. So this is my database server. I'm going to go in and configure my security groups. I'm going to use an existing security group, but I'm not going to use the WebDMZ. I'm going to use the default security group. And then I'm going to go ahead and hit review and launch. And then I'm going to go ahead and hit launch. And I'm going to use my new key pair. So I'm going to use the same key pair as I did for the other one. And I'm going to go in and view instances. Now, straight away, we can see over here, we have a public IP address for this EC2 instance. So let's go in and try and connect to this EC2 instance. Okay, so I'm going to go over to my downloads directory, and I'm going to hit enter. And in here, I've got my my new key pair. So my new key pair, I am just going to chmod that because this is a new key pair. So I'm going to do the appropriate permission so I can connect in. And there we go. And then I'm just going to clear the screen, and to SSH in, I'm just going to type SSH EC2 user and then @ and then the public IP address. So pasted that in there, then -i, and then it was my new key pair.pem. Hit enter, type in yes, And there we go. I am now SSH'd in to my EC2 instance. I'm going to elevate my privileges to root, and then I'm just going to go ahead and clear the screen. So that is the end for part one. I'm conscious we're about to go over 20 minutes. This is basically what we've created thus far. So we've got our VPC with an internet gateway attached. We've got our two different root tables. One's a public root table and one's our default root table. We've got one network ACL. We've got two security groups. One's WebDMZ and one's our default security group. Our EC2 instance that's private is in our default security group, and our EC2 instance that's public is in our WebDMZ. And right now we can only connect into the public EC2 instance because we've got a public IP address. So what do we learn in this lecture? Well, we learned that when you create a VPC, a default root table, a network access control list, and a default security group is created. It won't create any subnets, nor will it create a default internet gateway. And just remember that US East 1A in your AWS account can be a completely different availability zone to US East 1A in another AWS account, that the availability zones are always randomized. And then, of course, Amazon always reserve 5 IP addresses within your subnets. You can only have one internet gateway per VPC. And then finally, we learned that security groups can't span VPCs. So that is it for this lecture. In the next lecture, we're going to connect into our EC2 instance that's in our private subnet. So if you've got the time, please join me in the next lecture. Thank you.